It's not surprising that the blockbusting diet book of the season is The Fast Diet, The Secret of Intermittent Fasting, Lose Weight, Stay Healthy and Live Longer. And a quick look on the web will show you it has many, many clones. The essence of all these bestsellers is to eat very little food for 2 days, fast, and then eat normally for 5, the 5-2 diet. Wine writer Fiona Beckett has been following 5-2 since last November.
I think you really want to keep it simple. You don't actually, on a fast day, want to spend hours in the kitchen sort of fiddling around with something elaborate. You just want something rather nice, rather delicious. And, it needn't be penal. You can have really quite nice foods. I mean, Asian cooking is particularly good on the 5-2. The sort of Asian-style broths and stir-fries are really good. And things like seafood. You can have prawns and shrimps and all sorts of really quite delicious things. So it's not as if it's kind of like a great deprivation.
Glory, glory, oh, hallelujah, oh, glory, glory.
Pastor Grace Komolafe has little interest in block-busting diet books. But she's been fasting since she was a teenager as a member of the Pentecostal Church, the fastest-growing Christian group in the UK. Most Pentecostalists fast regularly, part of their emphasis on the work of the Spirit, and their belief that they're taking the church back to its early, simple beginnings. She seemed the woman to teach me what fasting means now, particularly as I was considering, as part of preparing for this programme, going on a fast myself.
Fasting is so beneficial for us, every Christian, so that will keep us calm. It will actually detox us, because we need to be detoxed, not only from all the toxin, but from unbelief. When you fast, you discover that your spirit is just lifted up. You understand the Word of God more. You have more revelation of the Word of God. Fasting should be put back on the menu of the church, because it is our inheritance. In fact, fasting is an instrument of humbling.
An instrument of humbling, perhaps. But it turns out those early Christians and present-day Pentecostalists are onto something more. There's a growing body of scientific evidence that intermittent fasting is remarkably good for us physically. Mark Mattson, professor of neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University in the United States, is one of the leading researchers on the benefits of fasting.
About 25 years ago, we started working on animal models to try to understand what's going wrong in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, as well as Parkinson's disease. And we knew that the major risk factor for these disorders is advancing age. And other laboratories had demonstrated years before that simply reducing the calorie intake in animals will result in them living much longer, and it kind of slows down the aging process. And we found that simply placing animals on, for example, alternate day fasting, where they go 24 hours every other day with no food, would protect nerve cells in their brains in these experimental animal models of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases.
Research that cast light on a story Andrew Yotishki came across in his early history work.
The most extreme example, I suppose, is the story of a hermit called Onufrius. He almost certainly didn't really exist as a real person. It's a story. And he supposedly lived in the same spot in the Sinai desert under a palm tree for 30 or 40 years, and surviving only on the dates that fell from this date palm that he was sheltering under. Without wanting to say that it is actually possible to live solely on dates for 30 or 40 years, the more I looked into it, actually, the more plausible it became that dates could form the staple of the diet of someone who is in that kind of position, is living a largely sedentary life. Dates are extremely rich in certain kinds of vitamins and in fats, and in fact we have plenty of other evidence from more contemporary literature that Bedouin lived for very long periods solely on dates and camel milk.
Bedouins living their hard lives on dates and camel's milk gives a hint of the evolutionary benefit that might come with a form of partial fasting.
Eating 3 meals a day plus snacks is abnormal. That's abnormal eating patterns based on our evolutionary history. We think in part intermittent fasting is good for the brain because when you go without food for an extended time period, nerve cells in your brain actually become more active. And we're finding in animals that improves their cognitive function, their learning and memory. And it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of evolution. If you're an animal or one of our early ancestors in the wild and you haven't had food for a while, you better keep your mind active and figure out what you need to do to find food so you can survive. When they're hungry, nerve cells are more active, and that in turn leads to the production of proteins we call nerve cell growth factors that, as the name implies, promote the growth of nerve cells, formation of new synapses, and improved function of the brain.
Mark Matson. For Pastor Grace, it is the intention behind fasting that's the key.
Fasting is for God, it's not for you. You are fasting to seek the face of God. And because of that, before you do your fasting, the spiritual preparation that is needed is to search your heart. Are you doing it for the right motive? And also, you need to start gradually if you want to start to do a long fast. Gradually means that before you begin the fast, maybe 2 or 3 days before the fast, you stop eating sugar products. You wean yourself from caffeine, and you start eating, smaller portion of food. So that will train your body. And it will make the fasting easy for you.
Talking to Pastor Grace confirmed me in my belief that I ought to practice what this programme is, sort of, preaching. So a few days ago, I began modestly. Well, I've decided that I will fast. I can probably only do it for about 30 hours. Spiritually, I should think of forgiveness and, as Pastor Grace says. So I've tried to do that. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will try and fast till tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. It shouldn't be very difficult. It hardly compares with the Desert Fathers. Meanwhile, in Bristol, Fiona Beckett continued with her less austere but much longer-lasting endeavour.
Well, the things you can eat quite a lot of are fish and seafood, vegetables, a bit of fruit, but fruit's quite calorific. It's really the things you need to steer clear of. But the point of the diet and why it's so incredibly clever is that you only steer clear of them for a day. There is always the thought of, if I can't have cheese, for example, I can have it tomorrow. It's the psychology of the diet that's so incredibly clever. So, on the fast days, I don't eat carbs on the whole. Bread, pasta, cheese, not much meat really, occasionally chicken, but not red meat, and no alcohol.
In the early church, fasting was often no more than a spiritual version of the 5-2 diet, taming gluttony. Andrew Yotishki.
There's a treatise by St. Bernard of Clairvaux from the 1120s. He's one of the founding figures of the Cistercian order, and he's very critical of eating practices in other Benedictine monasteries. He describes in considerable detail and with great indignation the numbers of courses that are brought in to feed these monks. He describes the complex flavours, the skill of the cooks, the way in which food is dressed up to resemble something else, and the effect that this has on monks. And he says it deflates and depresses the spirit. It leads to a sort of lowering of spiritual awareness on the part of monks.
It's 9 o'clock at night. I'm not hungry, but that's hardly surprising. 6 hours isn't very long. I miss dinner. At the moment, it doesn't seem that big a deal.
There is a physical benefit as well in fasting. Fasting keeps you young. Yeah, it keeps you very young, and it keeps your mind alert. Your skin becomes very smooth and shining if you give yourself to fasting. So for all those benefits as well, fasting is very good.
I have to say that if you hadn't said that you were 25 and that 40 years, I wouldn't have said you were in your 60s. You have very, very youthful skin.
Yeah, I'm 67. Yeah.
You don't look 67.
Thank you.
Those side benefits to a spiritual practice have their roots in scientific fact. Mark Matson.
Intermittent fasting will improve glucose regulation and therefore protect against diabetes. And the reason that happens is that when you go without food for an extended time period, say 12 to 24 hours, your muscle cells and your liver cells will undergo changes that make them better able to remove glucose from the blood, so that when you do eat, the glucose is rapidly removed and taken up by the cells where it's needed and used. Another clear effect that we've documented in our animal studies is that intermittent fasting will lower blood pressure and reduce resting heart rate and enhance ability of the heart to respond to stress.
Another beneficial impact is the one Fiona Beckett is pursuing.
Weight loss has gone really well. I've lost about 19 pounds, which is great. I needed to, and that's over a period of just over 3 months.
That steady weight loss is what Professor Mark Matson documented in a study of 100 women, a third eating normally, a third on a reduced calorie diet, and a third practicing intermittent fasting.
And in this study we did it 2 consecutive days a week. They ate only 600 calories, so essentially 1 meal each day. And they were on the diets for 6 months. And what we found is that, as expected, both energy-restricted groups lost weight. But we found that the group on the diet that we're calling the 5-2 diet, the women, they lost more belly fat, and their glucose regulation was improved so that they were able to maintain lower blood glucose levels.
Professor Mark Matson, so far, so positive. Where's the harm in avoiding a couple of thousand calories a week? But there haven't been any medical studies in this country of the 5-2 diet. So, in the absence of cast iron findings, the medical experts recommend getting your doctor's advice before starting any kind of fast. It's now 2:30 on the second day, almost 24 hours since I started this. The difficult bit today was getting on a train at midday to come to Oxford. And everyone, or so it seemed, was eating lunch. The smells of station food, Cornish pasties and soup and bacon sandwiches. It's just after 7 on the second day, and I've been extremely hungry for nearly 2 hours. But I feel bright and sharp, and my head is very clear, and I feel a bit messianic, kind of godlike, and the feeling that I ought to do this every week, that this is the answer to humanity's problems. I feel terrific. Now I'm going to eat dinner. After I'd broken my fast and the messianic feeling had passed, sadly, I went to Pastor Grace's New Covenant Church in Woolwich to see how fasting fitted into church life. After the joyous musical service, I talked to senior cleric Pastor Shayo.
The difference between fasting and doing hunger strike is when people abstain from food, but they are not taking time to pray. That's more or less doing an hunger, trying to work on. But what we do is really that time is devoted to prayers, so that we can have a close or whatever. The body will be down and the spirit will be up to be able to communicate with God. That's why we do it.
Though their motivations are different, there are similarities between Pastor Shayo's reaction to fasting and Fiona Beckett's to her not-so-newfangled fasting diet.
This way of eating, these, quite Spartan days, give you an enormous amount of energy. You do feel more energized. You also feel much more mentally sharp. Your concentration's better, and just generally feel healthy. I mean, a lot of people sort of say you do look well. I think it gives you a great sense of control, the fact that you can decide not to eat and actually recognise again what it is like to be hungry. I'm not pretending that, in our Western lifestyle that we're ever genuinely hungry, but to actually feel a gnawing sense that you would actually like to eat, as opposed to perpetually feeling rather full, is quite a novel sensation and an interesting and I think entirely healthy one.
The body, the mind, the spirit. Fasting, even done for the worldliest reasons, seems to touch them all. I asked Simon Cohen what he thought of Pastor Grace's belief that fasting should be put back on the menu of the church because, as she said, it's the instrument of humbling.
One of the reasons for fasting, particularly within Christianity, and we're hearing these messages echoed by Pope Francis, of course, is around solidarity with the poor and being without. We're so privileged to live in the society and all of the luxuries that affords. And by going without, particularly going without food or ingredients that we have learned to love so much, is a humbling process. And I think it's quite difficult to really build empathy or compassion, to really dethrone ourselves and put ourselves in the position of the so-called other, unless we behave or eat or drink like the so-called other as well.
Do you think it's coincidental, then, that the hottest, most fashionable diet right now is the 5-2 fast diet, which is that you eat normally for 5 days and then you eat very few calories for 2 days?
I'd not heard of this before, but I think that one of the crucial points when looking at the faith traditions and fasting and indeed feasting is looking at the question of motivations. Why are we fasting? Why are we going without? Are we doing it so that others think that we're really cool? And look at the sacrifices I'm making, or look at how thin and lithe I'm looking today. Or is it to go into a deeper understanding and a deeper relationship with the food that we put or plonk in our mouths so often? And I think that motivation is really key. And that's not to say that many of the people who are reading this book have got impure motivations, but I do think that it's important to ask ourselves, why are we going on this? And what are we learning as we're going through this fasting or through these diets? And how is it shifting or changing our relationship to the things and the food that we consume?